So welcome to the Bold Story Press Publishing webinar. I'm Emily Barrosse, and I am the founder of Bold Story Press. It's more like 38 years of publishing industry experience now. I've really spent my whole working life in publishing. After college, I went straight to New York and started interviewing for jobs. Of course, the industry has changed tremendously since I started out. I'll get to that in a minute. Over my 38 years, I've published hundreds of best-selling books, including the best-selling college textbook ever published. It's Greg Mankiw's Principles of Economics college textbook. When I started out in the industry, they used a apprenticeship type model to train new editors and new publishing professionals. They required us to have experience in sales, in marketing, and in editorial before we could work our way up into leadership positions in the industry. And so I've been a sales rep, I've been a marketing manager, I've been an acquisitions editor, and eventually I rose to the level of publisher and vice president and editor-in-chief at McGraw Hill in New York. That was my last role in publishing. As I said, the industry has changed radically. When I started out, there were many, many more publishers. There were small publishers and medium-sized publishers. Of course, this was before the computer, so we used typewriters back then. But very quickly after I started in the early 80s, the industry started to consolidate, and bigger publishers started buying up the smaller publishers and the medium-sized publishers. Until today, there are 5 traditional publishers left standing. And interestingly, none of them are US owned anymore. They're all owned by the Europeans. So it is a smaller industry, but on the one hand, in terms of the number of players, but of course it's a much larger industry when you look at number of units sold and the amount of revenue that's spent on books and audiobooks, ebooks, print books across the board. Digital books, of course, the computer and digital books had a huge impact on the industry. And Amazon has had a huge impact. Amazon very quickly put all of the bookstore chains out of business with the exception of Barnes & Noble. And so what's left is Barnes & Noble and then those independent bookstores that have been able to hold on over the years. Usually it's true that 80% of all books are sold on Amazon. That includes ebook sales and print sales. And so they are the monster, they are the elephant in the room. And a huge number of new books are published on KDP, on Amazon. Amazon doesn't release those numbers, so we don't know exactly, but I've heard it's as many as 2.4 million new books are published every year. And that's a huge number. But we do know that there are a lot of books published on Amazon where the author chose to self-publish and uploaded their book files directly to KDP. If you want to write and publish a book, I think it's useful to think about your motivation. I've worked with authors who've had the following motivations, and found some of them to be quite successful and some of them not so much. Sometimes authors are passionate about the topic and they want to share that passion with the world. And almost always that's nonfiction writers, and often those are authors who are writing books in education or about specific nonfiction topics where they've done their life's work or research. Some authors talk about, these are usually fiction authors, having a story inside that they need to get out. And often that is the outline for a story that they want to get onto the page and then begin the process of fleshing out that story and writing it. But occasionally I've had authors who said that the story was fully formed inside of them. And really they were channeling the story onto the page. That's an experience that I wish I could have, but it hasn't happened to me yet. Some authors write to make money, and that motivation is, there are far fewer authors who write with that motivation today. If not because of the sheer numbers of books that are published each year, it is harder to become wealthy from book publishing. Some authors write to establish themselves as an authority or an expert in their field. And some entrepreneurs will tell you that authoring a book is as important as an entrepreneur as having a business card. That just the act of authoring a book, even if you self-publish that book, because let's face it, most people don't know that you self-published. They don't recognize the names of all of the publishers. It's very difficult for anyone to find out what your true sales numbers are. So if you self-publish your book and you sell 50 copies to your friends and family, most people will never know that. They just know that you're a published author, and they give you instant credibility and authority as an expert in the field. And some authors write to leave a legacy. And I'm finding more and more authors who are interested in writing memoirs. And we look at and evaluate many, many memoirs in a given year at Bold Story Press. I think it's useful also to think about for whom you are writing your book before you begin, who your target market is, who will want your book, who will pay for your book. That's an important question. What do you know about them, and how will you reach them? When I worked with authors at McGraw Hill, I asked my authors to fill out the marketing questionnaires before they started writing. And that included developing an avatar that was their target reader, so that they wrote down as much as they possibly could in terms of detail about that person. And in my experience, when an author does that at the beginning of the process or early in the process, when they get stuck at different plot points or just writer's block, actually, at different points in the creation, when they can connect again with who that reader is, it sometimes helps the author to resolve the issue and to get back to writing and creating. So I think it's worth doing at the beginning of the process. To become the published author you wish to be, do you need to make any changes? And I love this quote from Henry Ford. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And so if you've been talking about writing and publishing a book someday, but you haven't changed anything in your day-to-day routine, you're not, you haven't carved out space to write every morning, you may never get there. So I think it's important to examine the goal and to look at the behaviors, and do you need to change any of them? I also like this quote a lot from Marianne Williamson, and especially as it pertains to the women authors with whom I've worked, and myself, frankly. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. And I share that because so often when I'm working with women authors, I hear them ask, well, you know, what there are lots of experts out there who know more about this topic or who are more skilled than I am. Why should I write this book? And my response is, you should write this book because you have a story to share. And I hope that the process of writing is giving you joy and a sense of achievement. And there may be people who are more qualified out there, but that is not a reason not to write the book. I think when authors have a vision for a story or a book, they can find their audience. I'm going to talk about the 5 basic phases of the publishing process, just to give you an overview of what publishing looks like from the day you sign the contract until the day your book publishes. Writing, of course, is the first part and arguably the most important part. There is no one writing style that guarantees success. I've worked with authors with mostly 2 writing styles. The first one is the organized writer, the process writer, who begins with a table of contents and then works through that table of contents, putting in more detail, A heads and B heads, adding more layers of detail to the story until they fully flesh out that table of contents. And then they begin writing each chapter, following the table of contents as their guideposts, their guidelines. Some authors, and we call them pantsers, or fly by the seat of your pants, write by downloading everything in their brain about the topic onto the page. They begin the process by just getting it all out of their head and onto the page, and then they start to shape the story. They winnow out the content that isn't needed. They add content where it is needed, and work on that manuscript until they have it in the shape that they want it. Almost every writer with whom we work has to do some form of research. Certainly in nonfiction writing you do, and often quite a lot. But even in fiction writing, if your fiction is historical fiction, if you are setting your plot, your story in another location in the country or world other than where you live, you want to be sure that you have the facts correct, because many readers will forgive different shortcomings in writers, but most readers will not forgive factual errors. If they may forgive 1 or 2, but once they hit the second error or the third error, they stop reading. So doing that research is important in the process. Some authors today work with book coaches. And book coaches are a relatively new phenomenon. They certainly didn't exist when I started out in the industry. I'm going to ask everyone to please put yourself on mute at this point so that we can hear you. Thanks. Book coaches exist in 2 forms that I've seen. One is the book coach is an experienced editor who's worked with many manuscripts, and they are acting as your accountability partner. They are giving you feedback on the structure of your book, your manuscript. They are reading manuscript as you go and giving you feedback and helping to focus you in the right direction in your writing. And those book coaches can be very helpful in the process. Some book coaches are not trained editors, and they're really just accountability partners. And they may read content and give you some feedback, but they are not trained as editors. And so their feedback is the feedback perhaps of the typical reader who might buy your book, but not necessarily, a skilled technician who can show you how to make corrections or fix issues that crop up in your writing. Book coaches aren't cheap. too, but they can be a tremendous help to an author, and especially a first-time author. And then finally, some authors want to share their story, but they don't have the skill set to write it, and they're not interested in learning how to write. And so if they have the resources, they can hire a ghostwriter, and a ghostwriter will meet with an author or the person who wants to share their story several times, downloading their story, and then go off and write out the content, bringing it back to the author several times for the author to refine it, to change the voice where needed so that it better reflects the author's voice, etc. Ghostwriters are also not inexpensive. I alluded to this earlier, developing a writing habit. Any writing book will tell you that if you want to write and publish a book, your best bet is to set a time each day where you sit down to write, and develop that habit of writing every single day. Some writers like to set a time limit. I'm going to sit down every day for 2 hours, and I won't leave my computer until those 2 hours are up. If I get stuck, many writers follow the rule that this is writing time only. I can't spend this time editing or researching. This time is for writing. And so if I get stuck and I can't think of the next thing to say, I will just keep typing. And that may include sentences that say, I'm stuck, I don't know what to say, and just whatever's coming out of your head. But the act of writing and showing up at exactly the same time every day, preferably in the same place. Stephen King talks about this in his book. He believes that he trained his muse to show up each morning when he went into his office and opened his computer to begin writing. So the most successful authors do write every day. You will learn to self-edit. You'll have to in this process. I'm often appalled, even with business writing, when I go back and reread something that I've written, at how many errors I make, because I'm just moving so quickly that I don't see them as I'm creating them. And so I have to read and edit myself before sending or sharing anything with anyone. The same is true for manuscripts, for authors. I have never met an author who didn't need an editor, certainly didn't need self-editing, but every manuscript and every author that I've ever worked with, their manuscript was made better by working, not only learning how to self-edit themselves, but also working with objective eyes and preferably trained editors. You will want to seek objective reviewers in the process of writing. Sometimes writers don't share their writing at all with anyone else before they send the manuscript off to an agent or to a publisher, and that's a mistake. I think it's also risky to only share your manuscript with a loved one, because in my experience, we don't want to hurt the feelings of our loved ones. And so when we're asked to read content, we look for those things that we can complement. We don't always point out all of the flaws that we see in the writing. And sometimes it's because we don't even own the language to explain what's off. We just know something's off. But asking people who are not too close to you, who can be objective, to read your content and give you feedback is tremendously useful. And working with an editor is even better. And then for any writer, I always recommend that you be reading, certainly reading good books published in your genre. If you want to write and publish a memoir, you should be reading the best-selling memoirs. They will, they give you perspective. They show you how to do how to handle certain kinds of content. They'll give you ideas, if not even for vocabulary, but certainly for ways to express the story that you want to tell. Editing, as you can already tell, I'm a big fan of editing. There are 3 basic kinds of editing that most publishers will work with. Developmental editing is the most skilled editing. Developmental editors can read manuscript and give you feedback. Generally, they're reading, at 1,000 feet up and looking down on the story. They can give you feedback on your story arc, on your plot, your plot points. They can talk about tension and whether or not you're creating tension in your writing such that it keeps your reader wanting to stay engaged and keep turning the page. Certainly they will talk about character development and dialogue, and they're almost always in fiction writing going to be talking to you about showing and not telling. Copy editors do a lot of, some copy editors can do some of the work that a good developmental editor does, but they are reading for detail. And so they are looking for the grammar errors, for the typos, and for the style issues that may come up in your manuscript. All publishers work with a style manual. Most work with the Chicago Manual of Style. That's what we work with. And that means that we follow their rules so that we're consistent with respect to the serial comma, et cetera, et cetera. So a copy editor is reading for that level of detail, and a developmental editor is not. So if you're working with a developmental editor, you're likely going to need a copy editor too. And a good copy editor, an experienced copy editor, will be able to also comment on character development and dialogue, et cetera. And then finally, the last stage of editing is proofreading. Sometimes proofreading happens before the book is sent to the compositor and the pages are made up. And sometimes it's done after the book goes to the compositor and the pages are made up. But the proofreader is looking for any errors that the copy editor or the developmental editor missed. And if it's done after the compositor, it's also looking for any errors that the compositor may have introduced, because sometimes that happens in the form of spaces that don't belong, or a word at the end of the sentence could be cut off, or a letter of that last word can be cut off. So it's important that another pair of eyes look at the manuscript just prior to publication. Book design is a part of the process that most authors really enjoy. Authors that we work with at Bold Story Press, we sit down with them, with the designer and the editor, and hold a design meeting where we talk about the look and feel the author wants for the book. We talk about who the competitors are and look at those cover designs to see what the bestsellers are doing in the market. We ask authors to bring examples of covers that they love and covers that they hate. So our designers have more data for the process of design. And the designers are usually designing the cover and the interior of the book. Most of the books we publish are black and white, without any kind of illustrations inside, but every book still needs an interior book design. Someone has to determine what fonts you're going to use, what your chapter openers look like, what your front matter looks like, et cetera. And so that's all teased out during the interior book design. And then if you do have art, if you have photographs in your memoir or line drawings in your children's book, the designer will make sure that that art is of the quality it has to be in order to publish and look good in the book. And then we'll also determine where the art is placed in the body of the content. So the designers are critical to the process. Production is everything that happens to the book after the editor determines that it is now final. It is a final manuscript, and they turn it over to production. And if you are interested in self-publishing your book, you will need to educate yourself about all of these things and read up on them on Google or elsewhere. But you'll be choosing your trim size. Will your book be 5x8 or 6x9? You'll be choosing your binding. Do you want a paperback book? Do you want a lay flat binding because you're publishing a cookbook or some kind of instruction manual? Do you want a hardcover book with a jacket or a laminate hardcover? Do you want an ebook, an audio book? You know, all of these decisions are made in the production process. You have to decide what color paper you want to use and what weight you want that paper to be. Most trade books are published on cream or white 50-pound paper. So if you walk into Barnes & Noble, most books that you pick up will be published on 50-pound paper. But of course, there are many kinds of weights of paper. The paper that you see in the mass market books in the airport are different than the 50-pound paper. And books that are published in 4-color and that include 4-color art are often published on 70-pound paper and on 70-pound coated paper, so that there's a coating on the page. When you print that 4-color art, it doesn't get absorbed into the cotton of the page, which causes the image to blur a little bit, you know, around the edges. So when you've got treated paper, your artwork is crisp and the colors are more accurate. You'll have to do your metadata research. And for metadata research, we're talking about keywords and BISAC codes or category codes, but it's a lot more complicated than that. And you will, I mean, again, there's a lot of content on the internet about how to do metadata research. There are classes about how to do it, but it's important that you figure some of this out because it can have a huge impact on the success of your book, and especially on Amazon, where the algorithms will pick up certain books and push them to the front of a search based on the metadata. And that can make you or break you in terms of your success. You will need to get your ISBNs. You'll want to register your copyright. You'll want to register the book with the Library of Congress. And with ebooks and audiobooks, there are other formats that you will need to create in order to upload your files to your distributor or to KDP. And the last stage is the launch. And by launch, I mean marketing and promoting your book. Every author is involved in launching their book. Where it was once true with trade publishers that when you published with them, they had a marketing team who would do all of your marketing, that is no longer true. And if you followed the news at all about the recent attempted merger, the CEOs disclosed that they spend less than 2% of their annual budget on marketing for their books. 2% is a very small percentage to spend on marketing books. And really that means that the most successful books, the proven books, usually the fifth or sixth book by an author who's had success with earlier books, those books get marketed with that tiny marketing budget. And our marketing managers used to say the rest of the books, the unknown authors, the first-time authors, those books got thrown into the deep end of the pool. And that means essentially very little or no marketing was done. And those books that rose to the top, so some sales happened either through the work of the author or through through a good review that generated sales or interest or attention. But for some reason, those books did generate some sales. The marketing folks will go in then and invest some marketing dollars in those books. Often, authors don't get very much marketing attention from publishers, from traditional publishers. And so you will want to educate yourself about this process and be involved. We recommend to our authors that they hire a book publicist. If they're really serious about success with their book, the best bet is to hire someone who's an expert on marketing books. We also recommend that you create a book launch team. And usually that's friends and family, but certainly anyone in your sphere who has a big network, because the more people who will put the word of your book out into their networks, the better you're going to do with respect to sales and promotion. You will want to have your own marketing strategy and a marketing calendar, and you'll want to follow that calendar starting 12 weeks, at least 12 to 16 weeks before your book publishes, which is when you start sending your advanced reader copies out to reviewers. It's when you'd be writing to the Today Show asking them to interview you about your book. So 16 plus weeks before you publish, until at least the first month of publication, you'll want a calendar that covers that time. And you want to get reviews. Of course, you want the New York Times book reviews, and you want Kirkus reviews, Publishers Weekly reviews, but you also want to make sure you've got 50 reviews on Amazon as quickly as you can possibly get them, because 50 is a magic number that bumps you up in those algorithms on Amazon. And Amazon, once you hit 50, they start paying more attention to you. Once you hit 75, they start promoting your book in some ways in order to drive sales. So spending time and effort on getting reviews on Goodreads and Amazon is time well spent. There are different types of publishers, and I'm going to say a few words about what your options are as an author. You all know that the traditional publishers, the big five, about when I was starting out, I started out as an editorial assistant. I was making $10,000 a year, and I was on the nonfiction side, textbooks, college textbooks. And I worked next to another young woman, cool woman, and her career went to trade, and I stayed on the nonfiction side. And she eventually became the editor-in-chief at HarperCollins for the children's list and the young adult fiction list. And she was telling me that it was about 25 years ago that they reached the point where they had 35,000 unsolicited manuscripts coming in every year. And they simply could not keep up with the volume of unsolicited manuscripts. And so it was at that point that they decided they needed a gatekeeper in between themselves and the writing public, and that agents would play that role for them. And so they decided that they would accept no more manuscripts unless it came in through an agent, and all of the other major publishers quickly followed suit. And so the agents play the role of winnowing out the bad stuff and identifying the good stuff and sending that on to traditional publishers. Traditional publishers usually give you an advance of between $5,000 and $15,000 if you're unknown. It's higher if you're a known author. That advance is an interest-free loan. You will pay back that advance in the form of your book royalties before you start getting royalty checks. And you'll also split or share that advance with the agent, as well as revenues from your first year of royalties. So the agents are paid, but the agents are actually paid by the author, not by the publisher. So once you receive the advance, the publisher pays for design and editorial and the rest of the investment needed to publish the book. And then when the book publishes, they pay authors a royalty of between 8 and 12%. Usually it's 10% of net proceeds. They also recover some of their costs before they start to pay out on those royalties. So that's what a traditional publishing contract usually looks like. With self-publishing, you do all of the work. You get your own, find your own editors, find your own designers. You educate yourself about all of those decisions you need to make in that production process. You format your files and upload them to your distributors. And when the book publishes, you keep all of the royalty. Hybrid publishers and their hybrid publishers didn't exist. I don't think they existed 10 years ago. I don't think I heard about them until probably 8 years ago. But hybrid publishers live in between these two options with one foot in each camp. Hybrid publishers are always, I believe always, curated presses. They do not publish everything that comes into them. They winnow out the content that's not good and reject that, and they publish the best manuscripts that they receive. Hybrid publishers ask authors to share in the risk of the investment by paying a flat fee up front, and then the hybrid publisher, usually their teams at Bold Story Press, our team all comes from traditional publishing. Every one of my editors, designers, and production professionals have 20+ years of experience from the traditional publishing industry. So we do the editorial, the design, all of the production, and when the book publishes, we pay the authors 60% of the print sales royalties and 70% of ebook sale royalties. And then editorial service providers, they're not really publishers. They will, if you have the money, they will publish anyone's manuscript. So really it's a fee for service, but I threw them in also. A few more words about Bold Story Press. We started 2.5 years ago. It was during COVID, and in 2020, I was kind of distraught at what was happening in the world politically and environmentally and everything else. And I just became convinced that if more women were in positions of decision-making power, that the world would be in a better place. And I'm thinking specifically of Congress, but of course that's true in corporate America, in journalism, in publishing, everywhere. Because in many of these areas, we are still not anywhere close to having equal representation. And so I thought, well, what can I do to change, make any change or have impact in the world? And I thought, I know that women face some unfair disadvantages in the publishing industry. That has always been true. I decided that if I created a publishing house where we focus on publishing women's voices and sharing their stories, that could be a start. And so that's why I started Bold Story Press, in order to publish the good writing by women. In the past year, we've actually started to publish some good writing by men also, but not under the imprint Bold Story Press. So we want to elevate women's voices and help them to successfully publish books, but we also want to publish good writing wherever we are able to. So we are definitely a curated list. We reject about between 50 and 60% of the manuscripts we receive. We have an expert publishing team, as I said. We've all worked in traditional publishing with many, many years of experience. We do have distribution through Ingram, the largest distributor in the world, to 39,000 stores, and also through Amazon. And we provide customer service for all of our books and ebooks and audiobooks, as long as those works are in print. I love this quote: "Those who tell the stories rule the world." So keep writing and share and find a way to publish that writing. If you are on social media, I'd love it if you would like us or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. We're at Bold Story Press. And if you'd like to reach me, you can do so at emily@boldstorypress.com. I hope that this presentation has helped you think about how you will share your story with the world. And I hope that I've encouraged you rather than discouraged you to do so. So I am happy to answer any questions you have or talk about any topics you'd like to talk about. If you want to take yourself off, if you want to turn your video on and take yourself off mute, you are welcome to. You don't have to ask a question. And I should also tell you that for those of you who attended today's webinar, we'll follow up with an email offering you a short phone call. If there's anything that you want to talk about or ask about that you don't want to ask in this larger group, I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one. So that's a possibility too. So thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you, Emily. Peter Myers here. I'm a man, obviously, and if I'm still interested in sending something to you, would I email that to you and that you would work with an alternative press?
Yes, you should email that to me or go onto our website on the submissions page and submit it through that. And really what we're doing with our male authors, we are using our team to help you self-publish. So we won't publish you under the Bold Story Press imprint, but you can decide the name of the publisher that you want to use, and we will use our editors and designers to publish your book under that imprint name. So that the hardest thing about self-publishing, to be honest, in my opinion, I mean, assuming that you don't mind all of the research and learning you have to do, the hardest thing is to find good editors and designers, because there are a lot of scammers out there, and I'm kind of appalled at how many scammers there are that prey on this community. People who are not very skilled as editors and who will charge you a lot of money. And I think that's the hardest part about self-publishing, is finding those people who can really help you. So Peter, feel free to, yes, email me or schedule a phone call too, if you'd like to do that.
Thanks so much.
Sure. Anna.
Sorry, I needed to unmute myself. So I have a very niche-y, like I'm kind of doing kids artist books, like small editions. I just don't know if I don't know that you would be the right fit. It's kind of illustrations, but with kind of unusual book object elements, like cutouts or pop-ups or things like that. Do you have any recommendation? I'm just for like people to contact, or
Anna, if you will email me after the webinar today, I will come up with some recommendations for you.
Okay, super.
Yeah, I'm pretty active in the IBPA, which is the Association for Independent Publishers, and once I have a better idea of what you're publishing, I'll share that with some others and ask their advice.
Okay, super.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Carolyn, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Actually, I was also going to ask if you took children's books. And I have a couple other questions. So would I have to email you for advice on children's books?
We don't publish children's picture books.
Okay.
We publish anything starting with paragraph books on, early readers, middle school, et cetera. And in fact, really like publishing middle school books. But for picture books, there's a level of expertise that's needed for those markets that we just don't have. So we would rather refer you to someone who does.
Thank you. Another just quick question that might help everybody. In the submission guidelines, I noticed you listed those questions about how many followers you have on social media and how many accounts, et cetera. How important is that?
Well, that is an excellent question. And the answer is, I think you have to think about, it's very important to us at Bold Story Press that we be very transparent with authors about sales expectations and success expectations, because it's hard. It is hard in this market. And I think you have to think about what defines success for you. You know, if you're going to publish your book, what will make you happy? Do you need to make it to the New York Times bestseller list? Do you need to break even on your investment? Or is the process going to give you joy? And if you sell, I don't know, 200 copies or 400 copies, if 400 people read your book and you made them happy, that is how you'll define success. I think you have to think about those things because, and then if you're going to work with another publisher, you know, ask them how they're going to help you and whether or not they can help you match those goals. Sorry, the puppy wants to be in on the conversation here. So I'm sorry.
How important is it for the publisher to be interested in you at all? That's what I meant.
A traditional publisher probably won't publish you unless you have a following. So it's very important if you're sending your manuscript to an agent, because they want to know that when the book publishes, there is a community of people out there who will know about your book and want to buy it the day it publishes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And if you don't have that following, you're not going to build it between now and when you publish the book. You know, it just doesn't happen that fast. So,
okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Mona. Mona, do you have a question?
Yeah, I've been told that the following is mostly important for nonfiction specifically. But anyway, my questions have to do with a couple of things. One, I write poetry and fiction. So number one, do you publish poetry? And number two, do your books appear in stores such as Barnes and Noble?
So we have not published poetry, Mona. We would under certain circumstances, but the truth is editing poetry is very difficult. And it takes us, you know, a very specific skill set, and we don't have that. So, you know, I'd be happy to talk to you about poetry, but you may be better off, you know, publishing with a publisher who has an expertise there. And what was the second part of your question?
Do your books appear in stores such as Barnes and Noble?
Yes, our books do appear in Barnes and Noble and any other store. They're on all of the electronic, you know, catalogs, but it's up to individual stores about whether or not they stock the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Someone asked about international distribution. We have international distribution for English readers, speakers and readers. And so, yes, any place in the world who are buying English authored books. And we do have the ability to publish in other languages, but it's much more complicated. Other questions? Am I missing any hands? No other questions? Is everyone here?
I have a
Go ahead.
question.
Sure.
You said that if we emailed you, then we'd be able to contact you. And what kind of information? I guess what kind of information would you want, and what kind of information would result?
So we'll follow up with an email to you either today or tomorrow and offer you a phone call if you'd like to have that. And we'll ask you some questions in order to schedule that. But yeah, we can, I mean, once you're talking to me one-on-one, I'll tell you whatever you want to know if I know it.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Is everyone here a writer?
Trying to be.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, we would love to see your manuscript. If you are interested in sending it to us, you can either schedule that call with me first or just go ahead and send it in. Feel free to email me if you have questions that you want to ask via email. Lady, did you have a hand up? Did I miss that?
No, I didn't. I was just giving a thumbs up for I am a writer as well.
Oh,
Thank
great.
you.
Okay, all righty.
Do you publish books of short stories or flash fiction or essays or any of those things?
We do. We just published a very well-reviewed collection of essays. And yeah, I'd love to talk to you.
And
Fran Blake.
short stories and flash fiction as well?
Well, we've never published flash fiction, and no, we haven't published short stories yet, but we would.
Okay.
So we started just 2.5 years ago, and so we've signed 30 books and published about 24 of them so far. So most of us have experience with traditional publishers with most of these genres, but with Bold Story Press, we are. That's where we are in the
So
process.
if I wanted to send you short stories, you would be
We will.
willing to look at it?
We would, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for
There's a
coming.
few questions in the chat, by the way.
I thought I answered them. Do we publish historical fiction? Absolutely. We just published 2 this week. Let's see. I'm a pantster, Mona. Poetry books, Barnes and Noble. We do not have an in-house illustrator. Okay, I think I answered all of them. So thank you all for coming, and I look forward to talking to you again. Good luck to you with your writing.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. This was wonderful.
Oh, wonderful.